All right, let's talk about one of the biggest, well, thorniest questions in all of tech right now. When a truly autonomous AI causes a disaster, who gets the blame? Let's get into it.
I mean, really think about that. A self-driving car makes a fatal choice. An automated trading bot crashes the market. Who's on the hook? The programmer? The company that built it? The person who switched it on? This whole messy, high-stakes puzzle is what people have started calling the responsibility gap.
Okay, so let's define our terms here. The source material for this explainer says a true responsibility gap has to meet two key conditions. First, no responsibility. And that's about fairness, right? It means it would actually be unjust to blame any single human. And second, autonomy. This isn't just a random accident. The lack of blame has to be a direct result of the AI acting on its own, making its own choices.
So let's explore what's often called the pessimistic view. You know, the one that you see in all the headlines, the one that kind of fuels our collective anxiety about AI. And this is the core fear, isn't it? The worry, coming from what our source calls responsibility gap pessimists, is that these systems are just going to get so complicated, so alien, that when they mess up, and they will, we'll be left staring into a kind of moral black hole. A tragedy with no one to answer for it.
But here's where it gets interesting. The paper we're looking at, by a philosopher named Peter Koenigs, really pushes back on this idea. He offers a much more optimistic take by throwing down two big challenges to this whole fear. Asking, one, are these gaps even real? And two, even if they were, are they really that harmful?
Okay, so let's dig into that first challenge, because it really gets to the heart of it. Do these responsibility gaps actually pop up in the real-world scenarios we're all worried about?
To figure this out, Koenigs gives us a really simple but super powerful thinking tool. He calls it the plausibility constraint.
And this quote just lays it out perfectly. The idea is so clear. This constraint basically says that if a disaster is caused by a human being careless, or worse, acting with malice, then there's no gap. Responsibility doesn't just evaporate, it sticks right to the person who dropped the ball.
Now this table breaks it down so well, let's just walk through it. First up, you've got malice, someone intentionally programming an AI to do harm. Well, obviously they're to blame, no gap. Then there's recklessness, knowing there's a massive risk but shipping the product anyway. Again, that person is blameworthy. And finally, even for something like simple negligence, just failing to take reasonable precautions, the responsibility still lands on a human. The AI's autonomy is not some get-out-of-jail-free card.
Okay, so let's move on to the second challenge. And for the sake of argument, let's just pretend for a second. Let's say a true, blameless responsibility gap could happen in some really bizarre, unforeseeable way. The next big question is, so what? Is that really the disaster we think it is? Well, the first big freakout is all about consequences. The argument is, hey, if people think they can't be blamed for what an AI does, they'll have zero reason to build safe systems, right? And that's a recipe for disaster.
And you can see the logic here. It seems like a pretty straightforward chain reaction. Step 1. A responsibility gap means no one can be blamed. Step 2. No blame means no incentive to be careful. And step 3. No incentive means terrible things are way more likely to happen. Makes sense on the surface.
But remember our friend the plausibility constraint? This is where it comes back and just completely dismantles that whole argument. The chain of logic breaks at the very first link, because, as we just saw, the constraint shows that careless, reckless, and malicious human actions are still blameworthy. The incentive to be careful, it never actually disappears.
All right, on to the second big concern. And this one takes us to a really serious place: autonomous weapons and the ethics of war. The worry here is that a responsibility gap on the battlefield could violate the fundamental rules of war, known as jus in bello.
So to really get this, we need a quick primer on these core principles. First, there's discrimination. You can only attack military targets, period, never civilians. Second, proportionality. Any collateral damage can't be totally out of whack with the military goal you're trying to achieve. And finally, necessity. You have to use the least amount of force you can to get the job done.
So, here's the million-dollar question. If an autonomous weapon causes harm, and we have one of these so-called responsibility gaps, does that automatically mean these essential rules of war have just been thrown out the window?
And according to Koenig's analysis, the answer is a surprisingly clear and direct no.
The reasoning here is absolutely key. These principles, discrimination, proportionality, they're all about the outcome of an action. Was a civilian targeted? Yes or no? Was the damage excessive? Yes or no?
You can answer those questions without knowing for sure if one specific person is to blame. A military action can be unjust based on its results, even if we can't pin all the responsibility on a single individual.
And this all brings us to the real punchline of the whole argument. If this big, scary, metaphysical responsibility gap isn't the actual danger, then maybe we've been focusing on the wrong problem this whole time.
And this slide just captures that shift in thinking perfectly. The author suggests the real problem isn't metaphysical, some weird literal void where responsibility just vanishes. Instead, it's an epistemic problem, which is just a fancy way of saying it's a knowledge puzzle. The challenge isn't that no one is responsible. It's that it's just incredibly difficult for us to know who is and by how much.
And this epistemic puzzle is very, very real. I mean, think about it. For a technology that's never existed before, what does taking due care even look like for an engineer? How many millions of tests does a company need to run to say they weren't negligent? These are the really tough, practical questions we should be wrestling with.
And as Koenigs puts it right here, this knowledge problem is a serious one. It doesn't mean responsibility is gone, but it does mean that achieving responsibility justice, fairly and accurately figuring out who did what wrong, is going to be one of the great challenges of our time.
And that leaves us with a completely new way of looking at this. Maybe the goal isn't to go on a witch hunt for some phantom we can blame inside a non-existent gap. Maybe the real, urgent work is right here with us. It's about figuring out how we design the legal, the social, the ethical systems we need to fairly judge the complex network of humans who are always, ultimately, behind the machine. The real question is, how on earth do we even begin to do that?